Put Mr Robertson's fears to rest. Thank you, Mr.
Call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to take a call on the EEZ bill, the EZ drilling bill, as I call it. Mr Chair, it's disappointing that we're having this debate now. I think the Green and Labour parties were quite earnest in their desire to see this bill go back to a committee. I don't think it was a matter, Mr Chair, of playing politics with this bill. It's just the scope of the amendments from the Minister with her supplementary order paper. I've asked the Minister if we could actually vote clause by clause, because as I'll explain in my call today, that some of them we support, some of them don't. We'd like to be able to vote for the ones we do support. But the Minister herself said she wouldn't support that because it's so long and there's so many clauses being amended. If it's so large, if there are so many clauses being amended, what's the harm of taking it back to a committee to have more investigation, to actually get a robust, solid bill coming out of the committee? What I think everyone in this House wants to see is a good bill come out of this House. No party in this Parliament wants to see the current legislative regulatory vacuum that occurs in our EEZ. Now, by means of introduction to the people listening on telly and in the chamber today, what this bill does is set up a regime for our exclusive economic zone between the 12 and 200 nautical miles. It's a place where there hasn't been a great deal of rules or a framework where you can apply for consents. The Green Party, since 1998 is the earliest reference I can find when we first entered Parliament, has been calling for comprehensive oceans legislation because it's been a huge gap. And it's critical that this Parliament gets it right. A number of players, be they oil drillers or conservationists, want certainty. They want to know what the rules are. They want to know that the rules aren't going to change. The carpet won't be pulled from beneath them. What everyone wants is a robust bill that comes out, gets turned into law, that we can all agree on. What we want is something like the RMA, which has been an enduring framework. And it's important we get it right because, as the Chair of the committee, Nikki Wagner, pointed out, we've got a very large exclusive economic zone, the 5th largest in the world. An amazing environment where I think Kiwis take our sustenance from, our spiritual sustenance, obviously our physical sustenance with our kaimawana. It's where we get our economic sustenance from. You know, our $20 billion valued clean green brand in part comes from our ocean environment. It's where our tourism, our aquaculture, our fisheries industries are thriving. And the simple fact is that Kiwis love our environment. Obviously, people want to explore and exploit the environment, and that's why it's critical we have this. So the Minister's come to the Parliament with a huge number of amendments, her supplementary order paper. I want to touch on this before going into a little detail on 4 of those points. The first thing is that we were earnest and upfront with our desire to take it back to a select committee. I'm hoping the Minister would consider it. I understand leave was sought, but the House is the master of its own destiny, so the House might wish to consider putting that motion again. After all, what we want to see is a good law coming out. Now, with those amendments, we think the process around that was less than desirable. The opposition parties went to the Minister off our own bat to try and negotiate in good faith. We had a good meeting, and it's unfortunate these SOPs were literally sort of slammed on the table or uploaded to the website with no notice. Now, the Minister, what I call the Olympic strategy, because what we've seen is a number of quite significant announcements over the course of the Olympics, from Maui's dolphins to sea lions to the seismic regulations. What the government's done is announced a raft of top-level changes with their amendments, but they didn't actually alert the public or the Parliament to the rest of the amendments, because it's not just the 5 which were highlighted in the press release. We're talking about pages and pages of all various amendments. So while the government, I think, was trying to spin the amendments as trying to strengthen their bill from an environmental perspective, I laughed, chuckled at the headline in the National Business Review that the government was buckling to green pressure. But what we know is that I think it's simply spin. It's simply spin from this government. There's some amendments we can agree with, a whole host we don't. But ultimately, we're not seeing a better bill coming out. We're not seeing a more robust, enduring solution for this vexed problem which has faced numerous parliaments. So at the first significant amendment was Clause 10, the Purpose Clause. You know, we endorse the change we've seen here, which is the language sustainable management, but we think we should have gone a bit further. We take our hats off to the Minister that she got rid of that flawed, balanced ideology, as I put it, because what I think the government is talking about when they talk about balance is that you can trade off a little bit of environmental degradation for a little bit of profit. The flip side of that is you can trade off, Mr. Chair.
Gareth Hughes.
Mr. Chair, you can trade off a whole host of environmental degradation if there's a profit in it. And what we know from New Zealand, take our oil industries, we've got the 4th lowest government royalty and tax rates. For what we're getting, it's not the Kiwi economy which is benefiting on the whole, it's those foreign-owned companies that, meaning New Zealand is facing 100% of the environmental risk for the 4th lowest royalty plus tax rate in the world, numerous tax exemptions, hardly any jobs for Kiwis, and the profits are going offshore. So we reject that, what we consider the flawed ideology around balance. We take our hat off to the Minister that she's removed it, but she's only gone halfway because we've got those critical words, sustainable management, in Clause 10, the purpose clause, but what we don't have is the rest of it. Now, the government, I think, has been a bit confused around how close or distant it wants to get to the Resource Management Act, the RMA. Some days they talk about it as if they don't want anything in the EZ bill to be related to it, and then other days they want it to be strengthened to be more like the RMA. This comes with a whole host of problems because at that threshold between 12 and 200 nautical miles, we've got 2 different regimes, 2 different rules. So the Minister's gone part of the way with the changing of the purpose to sustainable management. What we don't have is the other key words from the Resource Management Act. So the current legislation, the amendment the Minister's putting to the House, is that this must be taken into account, the importance. Now, the key words from the Resource Management Act, of course, are to recognise and provide for. Now, what we're going to see is the courts essentially deciding this, and I think the courts are going to have a significant power. I want to touch on the international obligations because what we are seeing here is a deliberate weakening of Clause 11, which is the international obligations. The committee, which all parties supported, wanted to have the word in there which is consistent. I think we should have gone stronger and said this bill will be interpreted consistently with UNCLOS. Now, this is critical. This is how we get the responsibility to use and enjoy our exclusive economic zone. It's clear we have international obligations. Now, my question to the Minister, of course, is the Minister is emphatic that the current legislation, the bill in front of us and her amendments are consistent. Has the Minister got an updated legal opinion on the changes? Because what we're seeing is the Clause 11, the international obligation clause, actually changing, and we're seeing the purpose clause and a whole host of other changes. So if the Minister could table that new legal opinion, I think that would be beneficial to the House. But the fact is, many commentators from the Parliamentary Commission to the Environment, to legal experts, to the opposition parties, don't think it will be consistent with the with UNCLOS, and I think it's clear that we should be aiming to do this. I think the government's scared of being taken to court essentially over the interpretation. You know, if you think it is consistent with UNCLOS, you should say so. We should say this Act will be interpreted consistently with UNCLOS. Now, the Minister also touched on the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment support. Obviously, the PC has come out in support, but I think the Minister's taking it a bit far and maybe putting words in the PCE's mouth when she gushes over the support for this bill. I think the PCE, like the Green Party, wants to see something out there in the EEZ because we haven't had anything. But the PCE quite rightly says she's got a number of concerns with the bill. And the key question is this still isn't the overarching oceans framework that her office and numerous other commentators have been calling for. Where's the conservation side? Where is the spatial planning side? What we're talking about is a consenting regime. We're not talking about a management regime. And this is what we need because we've got a gigantic ocean space, yet we know so little about it. I looked into NIWA's research over the decades, and we still know so little about the marine environment. What's down there in the benthic and the trophic environments, we know so little about it, yet we're about to go and exploit it. I understand soon we're expecting a consent to be lodged for iron sand mining, which could involve 300 million tonnes of sand being moved off the west coast of the North Island. We're talking about Chatham Phosphate's proposal to dig up, I understand, 3,000 square kilometres over the lifetime of the resource on the ocean floor. These are huge questions, and with no information, we think we should actively be managing our marine environment, but this isn't what we see. So what we're seeing is an increasing strengthening in a few respects, but on the whole we're seeing the bill still fundamentally flawed and in fact being taken backwards. I'll be debating this in the later parts because this is where the transition measures, the penalties come from. But basically what we're seeing is a missed opportunity from this Parliament, a missed opportunity from this government, a missed opportunity from this Minister who could have engaged a lot better. We could have had a better bill, Mr Chair.
Jackie Dean.